But when you bring up the point about the fact that lobbyists have developed hand in hand with the growth of power in Congress, then you see how it can be a pernicious relationship, and now less and less of our legislation coming out of Congress directly reflects sort of the people writ large. I'm going to address this a little bit more later. Very good answers for the variety of reasons. We perhaps have less power than our founders intended to. So behind the headlines, the first point was that all elections are about continuity versus change. The second point, take a step back and look at this foundational governing principle, we the people. We are the ones who loan our power to politicians, but have they taken more than their fair share, especially when compared to the founders. The third point is going to get a little bit more personal here. I'd ask you to participate in this question that I'm going to ask you. How many of you believe that the parties as they constantly, or as they are presently constituted, how many of you believe that you fit very comfortably in a party, a Republican or Democrat? Okay, one person, two of you. Now that's very telling, is it not? Are you not confirming by an overwhelming majority George Washington's suspicion that parties would become their own interest and not necessarily in the national interest? And we have to tease out, we have to be careful to tease out what party platforms say. I think most of us would feel comfortable within a party if we just look at the party platform. But then we look at how parties actually operate, and most Americans, and I'm not speaking here personally, and I'm not necessarily saying this is you, but polls show that most Americans now are a little suspicious of the way those parties actually operate and even fulfilling their own platforms. The two of you who raised your hands regarding feeling fairly comfortable within a party structure, do you believe that the platform of your party is adequately expressed in the application of politics in our society? Sir, are you comfortable with the way the platform expresses its opinion where the rubber hits the road and the politicians are actually...
Well, yes. I'm happy with the platform, but I'm unhappy with the way that it's actually operated.
Okay, yes, very good. That's a very...
I don't always follow the platform.
Okay, very good way to put it. Okay, so you're happy with the platform, but not the way that the platform is translated into day-to-day politics. Yeah. Yes, okay, the way the principles become practice. Okay, and we had somebody over here. Yes, ma'am.
Not always happy with the platform.
Okay.
I long for the policy and to find out what policies are behind each person who represent the party.
Okay. Okay, very good. And I'm just curious, in this room, how many of you regard yourselves as fairly politically attuned, and you read the newspapers, you intend to vote? How many of you feel involved in politics? Pretty engaged? Just about everybody in here. Okay, so that's very telling, the responses that you get when you ask this question about the idea of parties and then your particular party, its platform versus its actual practice. Well, maybe you are reflecting something that's a broader trend. I would submit that you are, because the fourth point that I would like to make that's behind the headlines is that American unhappiness has reached an all-time high. Now, how many of you were at Frank Luntz's presentation yesterday at the JW Marriott? Anybody here? He is one of America's foremost pollsters. Frank Luntz covers everything politically that you could imagine. Americans' attitudes, which candidates are up and down, who's in, who's out. I mean, he really has a great snapshot, a series of snapshots about the mood of America and this year's election in particular. But what has happened, Frank Luntz says that you have so many people who are unhappy this year that there is all kinds of demand for change this year. And it's reflected in several numbers that I'd like to share with you. The current Congress, the 110th Congress, its approval rating is a whopping 14%. 14%. That is the lowest approval rating of any Congress in the 3.5 decades the data have been collected on approval ratings for Congress. The 110th gets the lowest. And a lot of it is because people feel betrayed by the 109th Congress. Republicans, for example, were united with the White House, and a lot of Republicans said, finally, now we're going to see what Republican Party principles are when we have a Republican Congress and a Republican president. We're going to see what's going to happen. And of course, they spent more money than ever. And they were punished. They spent, the rate of increase was just about greater than ever as well. And so many Republicans decided at that point that they were very unhappy. So now we have the 110th Congress, and approval of the Democratic leadership of that Congress is also low. Democrats do not believe that they have seen the change that they were promised when the 109th Congress changed over to the 110th, and Senator Reid and Speaker Pelosi became the leaders of the Democratic Party in Congress and the Senate. So Americans were angry, upset at this. Now let's look at the presidency. President Bush has the lowest numbers of any president since presidential polling has taken place back in the 1930s. The mid-1930s, Gallup begins these polls asking who or what do you think of the president? Are we on the right track? Are we on the wrong track? Do you approve of this president? Do you disapprove? President Bush is unique in that he had the highest poll numbers in presidential polling history shortly after 9/11, so 7 years ago, the highest numbers, and they have sunk to some of the lowest numbers. Now, I don't want to put too fine a point on this because a lot of presidents have been down around his numbers. If you think of Harry Truman toward the end of the Korean War, very low presidential numbers. If you think of Richard Nixon on the eve of his resignation, very low approval numbers. If you think of other presidents, Jimmy Carter, for example, after the failed Iranian hostage crisis rescue attempt, and then he gives a speech on our national malaise, his numbers went down. They said, wait, the problem's not us, it's you guys in Washington. You're the ones with the malaise, don't look at us. His numbers also went down. So you have a very interesting set of negative numbers for a lot of presidents, but here's what makes President Bush's numbers a little bit different in that they have been, because he's been in office for 8 years, he's come under more scrutiny in a controversial time, and so the numbers have been lower for a longer period of time with President Bush than for the other three presidents. Of course, Jimmy Carter was only in office 4 years. So you're a little bit of comparing apples and oranges there. But Americans are upset. That's the behind the headlines point that I'm trying to make, is that Americans now are upset both with Congress and with the president. Consistent with this, I think, are specific factors that people care about. They think about when they say, why are we angry this year? Why are we upset as an electorate, as voters? Why are we calling for change? In this tension between change and continuity, why this year is the emphasis not on more of the same, but we really have to change course? Well, I think we all know. A lot of people's pay raises have not kept up with inflation. If you look at, and especially people on fixed incomes feel this very acutely. If you look at the prices that we're paying at the gas pump, adjusted for inflation, we're paying more for gasoline than we have in a long, long time. Since World War II, some would argue, but economists who look at this thing, some economists are saying than ever. And we are now paying more than, say, adjusted for inflation, what we were paying after the Arab oil embargo in 1973. Well, this is making a huge impact on the cost of transporting goods. Do you know how much it costs a trucker now to fill up his rig with diesel? $1,000. Just a few years ago, they were saying they could ship a can of beans across the country for $300. Now it costs $1,000 for them to fill up their rigs. So you have a very palpable impact on all of us as consumers